Thank you very much. It was not the introduction I was expecting, but I appreciate it. I told my wife I gave up podiums for Lent. Out from behind the podium. I want to do three kind of things tonight. One, tell you a little bit about who I am and how I got to where I am. Two, talk a little about the political, the election last night and how we got to where we are. Three, talk a little bit about the media. And then last, I'll take all your questions. And whatever you guys want to talk about, fair game. So if you stick around and want to raise your hand, I promise I'll answer your question. So if we can make that deal, we can have a great time. So I grew up in Rhode Island. It's about as Republican as Berkeley. My father served votes for a living. My mom took care of all the kids. We were what most people call a working class family. We had good years, we had bad years. Depending on how many votes my dad sold, that's how we knew how we were doing. I was the entrepreneur in the house. My parents had a philosophy that if you wanted something, you earned the money to get it. So I sold everything. Cards, cookies, you name it, I did it. As I was getting into 6th and 7th grade, my grandmother would regale me with stories about this school about 40 minutes away. And she would say, all the really good kids, all the smart boys go to Portsmouth Avenue. It was a Catholic boarding school. Well, I'm a good kid, and I'm a smart kid, so I should go there. So I started sending off for all the brochures and getting all the literature and trying to figure out how this was all going to happen. My parents kind of, allowed me to have this little fantasy for a while until they realized that I started filling out applications. The one thing that I didn't realize is that these schools cost money. And so I thought, okay, I can just go. I'll get in, and this will work out. Well, my parents kind of realized, hey, if we got a kid in 7th grade that is committed to his education, we got to figure out how to do this. So we applied for and got some financial aid. I got some scholarships, and my mom went to work to make sure that we had enough income to balance it all out. So one of the first things I did when I got to school is I was this day student. There were about 10 of us in the class. I walked to the center of town every morning. I took a bus, as I mentioned, 40 minutes to Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and then walked down a lane to the school. And as I get older, the lane becomes steeper and longer. But that was how I did my day, and then at the end of the day, I would go back. Well, it wasn't too long into the first semester when I realized, hey, wait a second, I got an idea. Almost every one of these kids is not going to be able to spend their birthday with their parents. So I hand wrote a note to every single parent of every single boarding student. And I simply said, it's a shame you won't be able to spend your son's birthday with them, but I tell you what, if you send me a check for $50, I will bring them a cake. And then I went down to Berkeley, Rhode Island, and I made a deal. And I said, if you sell me cakes all year long for $12, I promise I will buy them all for you. And suddenly, I'm out making some money. My dad's like, yeah, maybe I'll go to business with you. So, as I progressed through the years, one of the teachers that became kind of a mentor to me had basically seen the struggle that my parents and I had gone through to pay the tuition, to get by. We're in a school where, for most of the students, money was never going to be a problem for them. But every time that we wanted to, they went off to do something, I was the kid that said, well, I got to work during spring break, I got to do this on the weekends. And so this one teacher took a real interest in me. He said, look, Sean, as you get ready to go to college, and this is in the late 80s, he said, I have an idea. I know how you really are struggling with this and trying to find a path forward so that you won't face the same issues that your parents face. I have an idea. If you go to school and learn Japanese language and get a degree in economics, those two things will be invaluable and you'll be able to write your own ticket. And I was like, okay, how hard can that be? So I enrolled in intensive Japanese language my freshman year. I woke up every morning, I spent 2 hours in class, then I would go to the language lab for another hour, an hour and a half, then I would practice my hiragana, my katakana, more at night. Halfway through my second semester, I got a note in my mailbox from the Dean of Academics. He said, please come see me. So I did. And he said, I'm not sure how your translation is, but but a D- in Japanese is a D- in English. You need to find a new major. So I started taking some various, different classes, trying to figure out what do I want to do. When I had taken Japanese, it was transactional. I was learning something because I thought it leaded to a better end. Well, I took this government course, and I found myself basically challenged and academically awakened. I sort of was intrigued by the role of government, by how politics operated. And we would get into these heated debates, and I really kind of felt passionate about the discussions and the subjects that we talked about. So I really started to get involved. I volunteered as an intern in the Connecticut State House. I would go downtown and volunteer for local campaign, for city council, for state rep, for Congress, and I really got into this. I started to really enjoy politics because it, to me, became like a sport. You know whether you won or lost. The first Tuesday after the first Monday in election years, you either won or you didn't. You either convinced more people to vote for your candidate or your idea or your initiative, or you didn't. There's no second place in politics. You don't get to go, the law almost passed, so you almost have to obey it. It just doesn't work that way. So I really got into this, and I started doing everything I could to get involved in politics. Well, I graduated, and I got my first job in the 2nd Congressional District of Connecticut. I made $1,000 a week, which divided by 4 was $250. Then they took out taxes, and then I tried to figure out how to eat. After that election, I was working for a candidate that at the time had never run for Congress before. We raised up $50,000. Our opponent had been in over 10 years and raised over $500,000. The New London Day had us down 12 points on the second Sunday before the election. But we went out, continued to have this grassroots effort, knocked on doors, put up signs. Election day came around, and on election night, we lost by 2 votes. That night basically has haunted me since then. It's become part of how I look at politics. I look back every night since then, I was like, oh my God, did we knock on enough doors? What if we stayed out an extra hour? What if I had made 4 more phone calls? What if we had sent another mailer? Everything starts to go through your head when you lose by 2, or 3, or 4, whatever it is. When it's that close, you sit there and you think, what if we just done a little bit more? Well, at that point, I decided I wanted to go to Washington, D.C. And one of the women that I had worked with said, hey, my dad's this big wig down in D.C. Would you like to meet with them? I said, sure. So I went down, we had lunch literally on K Street. It was very stereotypical. And there were all these beautiful tables with white linen cloths, and I sat at his table. And he looks at me and he says, okay, Tom, what do you want to do? I said, sir, I'll do anything. This is where I learned one of the biggest pieces of advice that I ever gave folks. I looked back at him and I said, sir, I will do anything I can. He looked right back at me and said, there are no jobs for anything. You need to figure out what you want to do, and then I can help you. And I realized at that moment that if people throughout my career would continue to lend a helping hand, but I hadn't even done the basic legwork before I went in to see them. And it was a really interesting lesson for me as I continued to progress going forward. That when I went into meetings and went in to ask someone for help, that I had a better idea of what I wanted from them or what I needed them to assist with. Well, anyway, at that point I began what I call a minor league career in politics. I started going from campaign to campaign and moving up. So you work on one campaign and you find the next. I lived in someone's attic, I lived in an RV, you name it. And I started to really enjoy part of watching these folks deal with the media. Because it was not just this idea of waiting to November. You knew every day. You would go out and try to push a story. You either wanted to shape something positive about your campaign, or you were on defense and someone was attacking you. But you generally knew by the end of the day or by the very latest the next morning whether or not you had been successful or not. I love that idea of shaping and selling a message and then trying to figure out if you could get it to go forward. The problem was that most campaigns and most congressional offices only have one press person. So when I interview after interview, people would say, nice guy, love your energy, you seem really cool, but we're not going to risk everything on someone with no experience. So it was the ultimate catch-22. I didn't have experience, but none of the places would give you it because you didn't have it. Well, one of the folks that I worked with on one of my first campaigns calls me and says, hey, you still want to do this press thing? I said, yeah. He goes, look, there's a race in Western Pennsylvania. It's a big primary. I'm representing one of the guys in the race. Here's the thing. He's probably going to lose the primary. If he pulls out the primary, he's going to be crushed in the general election. Are you interested? I was like, yeah. So I packed everything I had into my mom's Chevy Astro van, drove to Western Pennsylvania, and 10 weeks later, he dropped out. But my resume now said, Sean Spicer, campaign manager and press secretary. I had experience. So, sure enough, there's another campaign, someone running in New Jersey who calls and says, hey, I'm looking for a campaign manager that wants to get into the press. And I was like, well, I have experience. So I moved on to New Jersey and won my first race. And it was that first real interaction with the press that kind of started to really shape how I went forward. And it was because as we were dealing in the campaign world, you get all of these surveys, National Right to Life, National Federation of this, organization for that, fill this out, and we determine whether or not we're going to support you or grade you. So we'd get all of them, we'd fill them out, and we started to get media inquiries and say, well, the environmentalist just came back and said, if you get an F or a D or whatever it was, and we're doing a big story on that. We said, well, this is ridiculous. My boss is an outdoorsman, loves to do this. It's you know, these policies he doesn't think make sense, but this, how can you possibly say that, you know, he doesn't care about the environment? They said, well, this is what they say, so we're going to write a story on it. Well, a couple weeks later, I would say, okay, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, have come out with their survey, and they rate us an A and our opponent, you know, a D or an F. They said, well, we're not writing a story on that. So wait a second. Jobs in the economy are the #1 issue in this district. Why are you not writing about that, but you'll write about all of these other causes? And say, well, that's just, you know, how it is. Okay. So I started to go on from race to race, move around. In the year 2000, I got called down to Florida to help out with a multi-year incumbent. This individual had been in office for a long time and was facing the first serious race they'd ever had. He said, we need you to go down for the last few months and see what you can do to turn this thing around. I was like, okay. We're working as hard as we can. I get a call on election day, and they said, hey, Sean, we owe you a beer when you get back. We got the polling in, and you guys are just going to come up short. I said, no, we're going to run through the tape this time, and I swear we're going to win. So I looked at the congressman's schedule. He and his wife were supposed to go off and buy a car that day. I looked at the schedule. I said, go through the yellow pages. Look it up if you don't know what those are. And I said, I've done every dime. So we put the schedule together. We faxed over to his house. The phone rings. He said, what have you done in my schedule? He said, Sean, I was elected before you were born. Don't tell me how to campaign. Now, I was one when he was first elected, and I was like, is this the hill to die on? I was like, no. I was like, okay, this is not what we want to do. So I said, look, here's the deal. Wake up tomorrow. If you don't like the first diner, we'll walk away. Promise. We walked in, we go to the first diner, people start walking up, Congressman, how are you? We're going to go out and vote. And my wife, oh my gosh, thank you for what you did on this thing. He looks at me, he goes, when are we going to the second one? Second hill not to die on. I was like, do not rub it in his face. Election night comes around later that day, and we represented 3 counties: Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach. The year is 2000. For those of you not steeped in political history, there was another race going on at that time that those 3 counties became pivotal. The results start coming in: 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, which you're supposed to call. 12 o'clock comes. Congressman Clay Shaw has a 386 vote lead. We declare victory. Big lesson that night. We ran through the tape. There was not going to be any regrets that I had that I did back in 1994. We did everything we could to make sure that when we woke up the next day, no stone was unturned. Well, I went back up to Washington, and I was kind of rewarded for that. I got put into the National Party, handling a bunch of races, and I continued to kind of elevate up. I spent the last 3 years of the Bush administration as the Assistant U.S. Trade Rep for Public and Media Affairs, which is basically a fancy title for a trade spokesman. My main job at that point was to promote 3 trade deals that President Bush had signed and needed to get through Congress. There was a bit of irony looking back on that when I was promoting 3 trade agreements at the end of the Bush administration, that then I spent 6 months as press secretary talking about how bad it was. John, let me quote you to you. Well, the end of the Bush administration, That was what I wanted. Well, the new chairman of the RNC had been elected, and a mentor of mine called and said, hey, do you want to meet with him to handle communications for the RNC? Well, you know, I'm looking for these corporate gigs. My wife looks at me and Sean, this is what you've always wanted to do. This is the major leagues. This is the national party. You've always, you know, you got to do it. I couldn't let you not do it. You can't let you not do it. So I said, okay, it's only 2 years. That's how long the term is. Let's just do it. So I said, great. 2012 cycle comes along. We're $25 million in debt, which is not a good place to start. Long story short, Mitt Romney loses. We were not, frankly, the party we would have been at the time. But something really unique happened in politics at that point. We looked for the first time, probably in a generation, if not longer, at how our party operated. And did a ton of listening and a ton of analysis, and et cetera, et cetera. And we realized that traditionally, both parties have been taking a ton of money, jamming it into 30-second ads at the end of the campaign, and that was it. And you hope to persuade a bunch of people. But we realized through all this analysis that people were voting earlier than ever before, and voting earlier than before, right? And that you didn't need to have 30-second TV ads when you could have a one-on-one relationship with a voter through technology, right? You didn't need to blast a bunch of TV ads when people weren't watching television anymore and you had no idea who was seeing it. You could actually have email and other social media sites start to have a relationship with the voter. So I looked at my wife and I said, look, we really think we've got the secret sauce. We're going to raise all this money, do this thing that's completely different. What do you say? She's like, go for it. 2 more years. Not a bad deal. 2014 midterms come along. We're supposed to lose the Senate. We keep it. We pick up more seats in the House of Representatives than the Republicans have since 1928. We win a ton of seats at the local, state, county level. It's red all over. The hypothesis had been proven correct. It had worked. The data had told us where the votes were, where the voters were. We had been developing that relationship with people based on what we could do with their voter file to figure out when they voted, who influenced them, what issues mattered to them, all those hot button issues going down the stretch. But winning a midterm election is like winning a conference championships in sports. It's good, but you got one more big game to play. The Super Bowl, the World Series, whatever sport you want. So I looked at my wife and I was like, hey, you did well, but we really got to test this. First of all, she's like, who are you? Where have you been for 4 years? And go for it, who cares? And I was like, look, after that, no one has ever held a job this long. And I promise you, at the end of 6 years, what could you possibly do anymore? Like, I'm out. So we start off the 2016 election. And you think about it, we had 17 known candidates that people were aware of. And when I say that, there were over 114 candidates on the New Hampshire ballot alone. Most people had only heard of 17 of them, and that's how many we had on the debate stage. So we had this idea that we were going to reform the party system, our rules, get involved in the debates, do all this great stuff. And we start looking around at the field, and we're like, wow, you got Bush and Rubio. Scott Walker's going to be reaching out to all these middle-class voters, union workers. Ted Cruz is building this data operation. Jeb Bush is going to go out and raise a ton of money. And everybody's got this thing, and you're like, okay, and then there's a guy in New York with a Twitter account. Not to belabor the sports analogy, but you're looking at all these candidates as a political professional operative, and you're saying, okay, this guy's got this thing, and Carlos Fiorina's doing this, and this person's doing this, and here are all these things that you're trying to analyze, like who's going to have the upper hand, right? And then Trump is doing the equivalent of walking into a baseball field and being like, no, not using a bat, just going to hit it. And you're like, yeah, right, that's not going to work. No one had ever played the game this way, and everyone looked at it and was like, you cannot do this. You don't just get retweets and hold rallies. Well, we were wrong. January, February come around, Iowa, New Hampshire, he's racking up delegates. And one by one, all these 17 people are just falling by the wayside. First week of May comes along, the Indiana primary, and Trump knocks it out of the park. He becomes the presumptive nominee. So we have this meeting at the RNC, 4th floor. The Trump campaign sends its team down. All of our top folks, sit down with them. We're like, okay, let's compare notes. Okay, I'll go first. I've got 70 people that work for me. We have regional press officers. We've got folks in the state. We're running an opposition research team. This is all the stuff I have. The political team's like, we got 4,000 people in the field. This is what we're doing. This is the data. We're collecting the data. People going through their thing. The finance people are like, we raise low dollar, high dollar money. This is the network we got, blah, 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 blah. And the Trump team's like, okay, we tweet and we'll rallies. So I like to claim that it's like the old school Reese's peanut butter ad where like the chocolate falls in the peanut butter. It's like, wow, that tastes great. It's like no one had ever done that before, and then suddenly it was like, wow. And we needed each other in a way that had never occurred. In every cycle prior to this, the job of the RNC or the DNC was to be a resource provider to the candidate. The nominee looks down and says, you, all come up to headquarters, the rest of you work on this project, and everyone else just keep your mouth shut. You are effectively the JV team. You're on a team, but you're never going to be a starter. And that's how the parties are supposed to work. Well, Trump didn't have all these other things, and they needed to have us be part of the campaign in a way that really hadn't worked. Suddenly, the media was saying, well, this can't work. It's never been done before. We do battle all these calls. Well, Hillary Clinton has 1,100 people in Brooklyn. You've got like 68. No, that's a delivery guy, 67. And so we're like, yeah, we've got all these folks from the RNC doing all this collection, and they were like, yeah, but that's not how it works. We fight that narrative every day, but no one cares where you're getting paid from. And that was what we were up against in terms of the narrative. They were like, well, the RNC can play this role. We're like, yeah, it can, actually, and it is, and here's the data payoff. As we're heading into the final weeks of the campaign, our political and data folks saw something unbelievably unique. I call it upshifting the they called it upshifting the downshifters. In an election, you have what we call high propensity voters. People who vote like it's church. They go every week. You don't need to tell them anything. They know how they vote, where they vote, what time. And those are people you never spend money on. You don't mail them, you don't call them, because the history is they vote every time. But through a bunch of focus groups and data, we started to realize there's 6% of these folks, generally in each of the battleground states, that will never vote for Hillary Clinton, but they have a problem with Trump. So we started to think, okay, how do we do this? Because this is going to be critical. And we started to realize through more focus groups and more data mining that if we made the election a binary choice between the policies of Clinton and the policies of Trump, by over 85% they broke to Trump. So we needed to get them to the polls, get an absentee ballot, get them to vote early, or get them to vote on election day. And we went press, briefing by briefing, sitting down with folks in the media saying, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're going to work, this is what the data tells us. And again, it was, yeah, but you can't win. You haven't won Michigan since 1988, you haven't won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. This is a joke, you guys, and it's Hillary Clinton, she's got a lot of people, and you don't, and therefore, you can't win. If you actually go read some of the analysis that some of the folks in the media wrote at the time, Newsweek literally had a cover of Hillary Clinton printed. The New York Times had all of the front page and other stories lined up about the first woman president. They were all convinced there was no way we could win, despite the fact that we would sit down and explain what we were doing in each state and how close it was and how we had a path to victory. You remember Wisconsin? The state that we couldn't win, the state that Hillary Clinton wouldn't go, when they started to write stories about what a waste of time Donald Trump's campaign was undergoing by visiting there. It was so silly. What a waste. These guys are idiots. Look at how much they're wasting their time going to places like Michigan and Wisconsin. Election night comes around, and I'll tell you a funny story if I can. It's on election night, and this is where I really learned something about Donald Trump that I didn't fully realize. Most candidates on election night like to be around their senior staff and their family and people close to them because it's a moment. Like you're either going to win or you're going to lose, and you don't want to just kind of be out there. So we had this room on the 5th floor of Trump Tower, which was used to be the prop room for The Apprentice. We're in this little area. It's true. And Ivanka's phone rings, and it's her dad. And he says, where are you? And she says, we're on the 5th floor, come down. He goes, I'm on the 12th floor, you come up. The 12th floor was where the war room was. It was probably about as big as this auditorium. And everybody's gathered there. I mean, everybody. Like the Domino's guy, it didn't matter. We didn't have to security. It was like, just come on up. Peninsula, where Hillary was locked down like a drum, and we're sitting there, anyone's walking through. Trump wanted to be around everybody. It was unbelievable to me to watch this candidate sit there in real time, watch the results, find out if they were going to be the next president of the United States. It was a real interesting moment for me as a political operative to watch this transformation. Well, anyway, all night long, we're watching the folks in the press say, well, this is what we're seeing. And we're like, yes, this is the data we showed you. We told you it was going to be this close. And they're all reacting, it can't be this way. There's nothing that can happen. CNN's holding off on calling all these states because it couldn't possibly happen. We won Michigan by 10,000 votes, 0.22%. We won Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes, 0.7. So the data had shown that we could do it, and we did. But Ken, the entire narrative was, we couldn't do it. She's better. We're not as good. Well, we win the election, and we begin the transition. On December 22nd, I got a call that changed my life forever. Now, just as a way of background, I've been at the RNC for 6 years, as you heard. I've done at least 500 media hits. The closest I ever came to getting recognized was in the sweater section of a Joseph A. Banks. And when I say that, I mean, like this guy walked up and goes, hey, you're the Republican dude, right? I called my wife and I'm like, thanks. Little did I know. And after that, things kind of changed drastically. Well, we went through the transition period, and again, it was the same sort of, Trump's not doing what's supposed to be done, he therefore will fail. This person's not qualified, this isn't how it's supposed to work. Well, I kind of did my part, and I said, okay, let's sit down with the press corps, let me sit down with my predecessors, and I will tell you this is actually a really good thing. There are 28 of us from the 28th press secretary. It is a very tight club of former people that have held this. And I'm proud to say that everybody from Robert Gibbs, to Josh Ernst, to Mike McCurry, the former Democratic press secretary, George Stephanopoulos, were all very giving of their time and said, hey, because regardless of partisanship, they wanted the government to succeed. They wanted me to succeed, not in terms of agenda, but they respected the office. And I thought it was a great sign of why our country is so awesome, this peaceful transformation of power. Well, I met with them, got their advice, and I sat down with the White House Correspondents Association. I said, all right, guys, tell me how this all works. What do you think? They said, okay, here's the deal. The White House press briefing room is 49 seats. We assign the seats. Front row are the wires. AP, Reuters, ABC, NBC, CBS, Washington Post, New York Times, et cetera. Works back and then kind of works its way back. If you don't have a seat, you can stand on the sides. And honest to God, the president of the White House Correspondents Association said this to me. He said, Sean, for the first couple of weeks or whatever, people are going to come to your press conferences, and then no one's going to show up. It's like, I think it's past a couple of weeks. So I said, okay. He said, this is how these press things work. You start off, you give your little spiel, what the president's doing, what his schedule is. Then the AP reporter of the day gets the first question by tradition. And then you generally work your way down the Big East, right? And then if you have time, you can work in all the rest. It's like, really? Okay. So the first press conference that I took questions on was that Monday. I walk out, do my spiel, so the president's doing blah, 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 blah. Daniel Hopper, New York Post. Everyone in the front row was like, what did you just do? Let's go here. So I started working my way around the room. Spanish language media, urban radio, business media, conservative media, local media. Then I worked my way into all the biggies. I had this belief that part of Trump's message was that he was going to speak for the forgotten men and women. My view was all of these other members of the press corps who represented a constituency, from the right, from the left, from different niches, business, media, etc., had a constituency that they were going to ask a question on their behalf. They had just as much right as the folks in the beginning. And for too long, my view was that the folks at the front rows had monopolized what American people had seen, read, and heard. No one was asking questions about federal land issues, which are a big issue in the West. No one was asking questions about opioids, which plague so many of our cities. No one was asking questions about veterans or our military. So I wanted to answer them all. 45 minutes in, Julie Pace, the Associated Press reporter on duty that day, looks up and says, thank you very much, Sean. That's how they're supposed to end. The Associated Press reporter will tell you by tradition, that's when you end when they tell you. I looked down and I said, no, Julie, thank you, and I went on for another 45 minutes. My view was, every one of these folks in the press had a right to ask a question, and the White House should have to answer it. And then I wanted to set a tone that we weren't going to be like the press. We weren't going to focus on just the big ones. That all of these folks had an opportunity and a right to ask a question of the White House. So that's kind of how I viewed the job. And while there was plenty of criticism and plenty of issues that came up during my tenure, one of the things that I still find to this day gratifying is when folks that aren't in the front row come up to me and say, hey, Sean, I just want to say thank you for democratizing the press briefing. Prior to you coming, I rarely ever got to ask a question. And while we may have disagreed a lot, I appreciate the fact that you called on me. So I thought that was always an important thing. One of the other things, if we want to work back a day in time, 2 days, there was this big event that happened. You may have seen it, about the inauguration. It comes up from time to time. And people always ask me about that first day. And since I have a captive audience, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Because this goes back to the nut of media coverage and how I think it's shaping what's going on here. As I mentioned, during the election, we faced this press corps that said we couldn't win, nothing was going to go right. Trump couldn't do all this stuff that they said he could do, et cetera, always jumping to the next hurdle. He can't win these early states, he can't win the primary, he can't win the general, he can't win Michigan. Everything was he can't, and you keep jumping hurdle after hurdle. So we get into office, and we spend, our first day was Friday. He gets sworn in, we go down to the White House, and the president says, I want to just start at work, and I'm going to sign all these executive orders that I was talking about. Are they ready to go? Like, yes. He's like, you know what? I told the American people I was going to hit the ground running. Let's do it. Okay. So he says, go gather the press pool. And the press pool is a representative group of the media that belongs to the White House Correspondents Association. So they have a print reporter, a TV reporter, a radio reporter, a wire reporter, and these are all the people that represent the White House. And when you are in a place that can't fit everybody, or what we call an open press, you bring the pool in. So the pool comes in to watch the president sign these executive orders. Now, if you imagine for a moment, I'm the president. Don't get too far out. And he's sitting here at the desk, the resolute desk, signing these executive orders. The press corps comes in and is now facing the same way that you are, to cover him doing this. And their job is to give a report to all the other reporters that can't be there to say, this is what happened. So it's transactional, it's color, so this is who was in the room, the president was wearing a red tie, he took 2 questions, just so that all the other folks get the same information that the pool got. That's the deal that they all have. That's how it works. Okay, so they're all signing, watching the president sign this, the press pool gets ushered out. Now, this is a day that we're all ready to celebrate. We've got the inauguration, the balls that night, right? No matter what side you're on, if you're on the winning side, this is a pretty cool life moment. Your first day in the White House, you get to go to these balls and everything and celebrate your hard work and the beginning of what you hope is going to be a successful administration. About 15 minutes later, the chief of staff runs down to my office and is like, we got a problem. And I'm like, what? He's like, go look at your email. We were having this little meeting. I turn around and it's lit up. Emails are coming in, tweets are going on. The President of the United States has removed the bust of Martin Luther King from the Oval Office. What? So we literally rush into the Oval Office. And there's the bust of Martin Luther King, right where, if my back is where the press was looking, it was back there. What the heck is going on? So we call the reporter and we send out the picture. Here it is. He goes, oh, my bad. I didn't see it. Now, stop for a moment and picture this. The press is watching the president. That's right? They're watching who's in the room, what's he doing, giving the report back. This is what they were doing instead. What can I get him on? Why would you look? What news is happening over people's head and on a wall? He goes, well, I was blocked. Someone blocked it. So, first of all, that was what you came in for? That's how you're representing yourself for the press corps, to figure out what's missing, what he changed. Not what color the rug is, because each president changes the rug. I can see that kind of maybe newsworthy. But what is missing? What can I get you on? And frankly, if you knew that was the case, or you had a concern, why wouldn't you just come back and say, hey, by the way, I was doing bust checks, and saw Jefferson, but didn't see Martin Luther King. Is he there? And we would have said, yes, here's a picture, or come in and look at it yourself. But they didn't. Because the idea was, let's find something to get you on. So our first day in office is spent putting out fires on a racially sensitive subject. Once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't just pop it back in. You can't go, oops, my bad, I know that went viral on Twitter and everyone's writing about it and commenting, but you know what, we'll just send out another tweet. Once the fire started, you can't put it out. That's how we spent day one. Go to sleep, day two. President wakes up, calls me, he's like, what's going on? What are you talking about, sir? I got my kids are running around. And he's like, you know, I've been flipping around, and these guys are all talking about like who showed up to my inauguration, whatever. I'm like, you know, these different panels are saying, you know, not enough people were there. You got to go out and like set the record. It's ridiculous that we're talking about this. And so, as I tell folks, look, that was probably my number 1, 2, and 3 day that I would like a do-over on. We went out and tried to focus on saying, hey, this is silly. Why are we talking about this? Here are a bunch of policies that have kicked off. Here's what you want to do. If you want to have a policy discussion, if you want to talk about, you know, here are people that are against what he's doing, and here's a group of, whatever. That's what I would assume we'd be talking about. Not whether or not he moved a bust falsely, or whether or not how many people were on the mall. But that was the mentality that we were under. And I'm not making excuses. I own that, unfortunately. But I want to make sure that people understand that when you wake up every day and someone keeps telling you, you can't do this, you're going to fall short on that, everything is negative, at some point you push back a little. And like I said, I would love to do that over again. But to the extent that I can, I think it's important to understand that that was the mentality of the press corps towards us. And to some extent, it's still, you know, it has grown even more. But when you're out there saying, is this really what we're concentrating on? You have to wonder what the priorities of the media is. Now, I will say this before I end and take your questions. I want to make it very clear. I believe that a free and robust press is essential to our democracy. We are the greatest nation on earth. We are a beacon of freedom, largely because of those kind of freedoms. Our First Amendment rights, our ability to have a free press, all of these other things make us great. But it's a two-way street. Journalists have to be able to be trusted. And if they're more interested in being YouTube stars or getting clips or clicks, I think that undermines the profession. And I frankly think it's bad for democracy. Now, I wrote a book, and in the book, I actually called out a number of good reporters. Intentionally, because what I wanted to do is say, here are people that do their job. I fight with them all the time. Sometimes I think that the story that they put is wrong or whatever, but they're fair. They'll call you and say, hey, what's your side to this? What do you guys want to push back on? Or how do you plead to this charge that's being made? That's their job, to focus on the facts, to pursue the truth. But when the focus is on whether or not there's a bust that's being removed, you start to question whether or not the priorities are focused in the right place. And I think that that's a problem. Since I don't know if I'll get to a Q&A, I will tell you the interesting thing about my analysis is that when you read a bunch of the media's criticism of itself, there's a reporter named Peter Hamby who was at CNN, he's now at Snap. He wrote one paper at the Shorenstein School at Harvard analyzing the 2012 campaign, and then he just published a piece in Vanity Fair looking at the last election. He's very critical of his colleagues and saying they're more focused on tweets and getting retweets and clicks and being sensational in many cases than they are in actually getting it right and focusing on big, important things. So I look at things in a very biased and political way. But when the press itself is starting to be critical of itself, that's where I think that there's a time for reflection in how we get our news and who's providing it to us. We're a free country. There's room for a left-leaning media, right-leaning media, straight-up media. But we've got to make sure that they're focused on the right things and calling out stories when they're bad. With that, I appreciate you listening. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. So, we're going to, did I say something? Thank you for coming. We're going to, there were some questions that were submitted, I guess, online. I'll take a few of those, and then you raise your hand, and I'll answer those. No, I want to stand. Thank you.
So, guys, we're going to get started with some questions. So Joshua asks, what is the best piece of advice that you would give yourself before you took the press secretary position?
It's just one. That's a really good question because I don't know that I would limit it to one. I think the one thing I would say is be better. There are plenty of times when I watch the tapes and I look back and I go, who is that angry leprechaun? and I mean that in the sense that, you know, a lot of what makes someone successful in later life, in my opinion, is rooted in a lot of the wisdom and advice that their moms gave me, right? Just because they did it doesn't mean you did it. Don't jump off the bridge because they do. And my mom would say, you know, just because they say something nice, it doesn't mean you have to say it back. And I think if I had just said, okay, you know what, say your thing, I probably would have been a little different.
Next question. Avery asks, what strategies do you use to handle the stress of such an intense job?
Prayer, meditation. I think it's that. I mean, I think since you don't, I'm not in the pressure cooker as I was in that sense, both at the RNC and now. It's a little bit easier to breathe and just say, okay, you know, you're not in the time crunch that you were before. So I think it's just a little bit more learning, you know, being just going, okay, let it roll off, and not reading Twitter.
The Ghana Ben hates.
Spent 20 years in the military, ready to go fight for people's rights to be able to do what they want in this country. That's what makes us a great country. I'm sort of a big believer in sort of the capitalism version of free speech, which is if you want to say it, you got to be ready to deal with the consequences. You know, so if you put a product out business-wise and it doesn't sell, that's on you. Or if you put out a bad product, you're going to get in trouble. And I believe if you want to say something, don't expect people to sit back and take it. They have a right to express themselves as well. But I do think when it comes to hate speech, there's a line. Right? If you're going after somebody because of their religion or their ethnicity, that is crossing a line versus their beliefs. Right? So if they have a religious belief or a political belief, and you're using that to attack them, that's a different thing than if you are literally, you know, focused on the aforementioned qualities.
I think what the person has is should they be allowed to do that? Say it.
It's like Justice Brandon, I said. I mean, you know it when you see it. You can't sort of draw a line these days and say this is hate speech, this is not. There's certain things that come out every day, and I think probably part of these days everyone's offended by everything. So where that line is sort of nebulous.
Next question is, what are the 3 best and 3 worst news stories?
3 best are all here. I don't believe in that. I think that there are reporters these days are mobile. So if you look at some of the folks that were there when I was there, they moved on twice to different jobs. Bad reporters at the New York Times. There are good reporters at the Washington Post and bad reporters. On the left, that are really good at an angle. Like the guys on the left who write for
Last pre-written question is, who do you think is the best presidential candidate for the 2020 election?
Trump.
Yeah, you can call.
I'm going with the person who loves me.
Yes, thank you. So you already heard my first question, which is most important.
I'm not sure that was actually a question.
It was a will you tell,
Yeah.
so
Oh,
therefore, yeah. Okay, the second question is, when we campaign in California for the presidential election, our leaders tell us that we need to focus out of state because we can't win California. Do you agree with that?
Right now, yes.
No. Okay.
I don't think it, look, I think that, I mean, can it change? Yes. I mean, but I think that we have to run good candidates, raise good money, build an infrastructure. And I think you can do that piece by piece. So you can go, county by county and start to say, okay, we're going to, build off San Diego and Orange County and start to move up or whatever. But it's not going to happen overnight.
Okay,
It's a big state.
then it's very imperative that he hears that it's the grassroots that need to make the choice on the candidate, not the GOP. For instance, Travis Allen before John Cox.
Yes.
He made a big mistake. Paul Cook, instead of, help me guys. My guy, down south.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. Lots.
Message received. Yes, sir.
What's like the origin of the whole 2 scoops shenanigan or fiasco?
I don't think there's an origin. I mean,
Did it just happen overnight?
no, I mean, look, that was a time story. Right? So, I'm trying to remember what I had for dinner. I had like a steak and they cut it into, I asked for carrots instead of onions. The guy got 2 scoops at a dinner once, and now they're like, so he got 2. Again, is that really? So those reporters from Time got invited to have dinner with the President of the United States. He brings them in, they serve a dinner, and apparently he must have told, hey, when you bring out the ice cream, can I get an extra scoop? I've been good today. I don't know, but I'm saying that, that's the origin. He asked for it, and he's the president, and they gave him a second scoop. I don't really think. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you like gum?
Yes. But just so we're clear, so I get both sides in, I also like mints. So, thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
I think I share your concern regarding the interaction between the media and technology as pertaining to their integrity, I guess as well in a broader sense, the interaction between politics and technology and the integrity of politics. So in the past, we had something called the Fairness Doctrine. It was repealed in the 80s, and I think since then we've sort of seen a devolution of, I guess, our political discourse. I would go as far to say that what we're witnessing now is the free market solution. And I think this sort of plays into exactly what I think it sort of plays into what you're saying about this is free speech and capitalism, but I think we're witnessing free speech and capitalism. What do you think?
I think it would be an interesting dissertation, and I'm being serious because if you go back and look at what was going on in the 1800s, people were literally taking out pseudonyms, opening up papers to attack their opponents, right? That was literally pretty blatant. You create a newspaper, use a bunch of pseudonyms, and then attack your opponent and their policies. That's pretty bad too. So I think there's been some degree of it. I haven't thought enough about the Fairness Doctrine's implications, but I also think that as a conservative, I don't think it is not a debatable point that the media has a liberal bias, right? That's just, and again, I'm not right or wrong, but that's just pretty much an undisputable fact. Talk radio came up almost as a response to that, right? Because we're not having our issues covered, and the ones that are slanted against us. So this rise came up. And I would argue that's to some degree a free market solution, right? And then what happened with the internet? Yes, Al Gore invented it, but then you saw this evolution of right-leaning sites, and I would argue that to some degree there's been a lot of negative and probably net negative impact with social media and a lot of stuff in terms of how it's impacted how we get our information. But there's also a level of the playing field, right? Because if you want to go publish something now and you get it out there and people want to read it, or you post something on Facebook, you don't have to go through the media and say, hey, I really, really would like you to cover this story and here are the important facts and I hope you make it into your package. You can say, hey, I'm going to actually write something on this and post it. And if people agree with it, they can like it or share it. I think the bottom line is I think it's an interesting question. The whole thing, not just the impact of the Fairness Doctrine of where we are now.
It wasn't about the Fairness Doctrine, it's just the idea that that we have for a long time. I think the fairness doctrine was in place for like 60 years, or 60 years or so. We have in the past regulated political discourse on news outlets.
Right. But yeah, but again, I would argue that as a conservative, that didn't work out too well. I mean, in terms of what if you look at the networks and how they covered us. But anyway, I would say that it is an interesting, broader subject that probably is a good academic interest or exercise that you could sit down and say, hey, let's look at a period in time and measure what they call share of voice in the PR world. But I think it would be fascinating.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever find yourself uncomfortable that your role as press secretary sometimes made you say things that you didn't genuinely believe in?
So, I'm going to answer, yes. Of course. I mean, look, I've served as a press secretary to at least 15, in some way, shape, or form, or worked directly for 15, 20 candidates and officials. There's no one that even, is probably in the 90 percentile, either through stylistic stuff, personal behavior, issues that they believe in, but you're never going to find purity. And I would argue to some degree there's very few jobs unless you're self-employed that you're going to find that. I mean, if you work at Berkeley, there are probably things that they advocate for or say or policies or benefits that you strongly disagree with. So I believe that the job of it, I mean, I don't work for people that I don't believe in. But there were policies where I was like, or sometimes it was a one-off way. But my job is to give the best advice possible to the people I work for, a message. But 5 things, but I think that's a horrible idea. You've got a job. And frankly, of most jobs. Yes, sir. And then I'll get you back.
So you talked about sensationalization of media. Obviously a problem partly tied to money incentives. What do you think is the solution to this sensationalism? Like, you do local news, you have like viral videos on there. It's not real news in my opinion. Of course, that's exactly. What do you think is the solution? Is there an economic solution to correcting it? What do you think? How do we get more facts, things that are actionable, things I can make decisions off of?
Honestly, that's the $1 million question, or probably more these days. Because I think there's a marketplace for it, but it's just it's not everybody's got this degree of sensationalism. To some degree, every day the president's raging. It's like, no, he's not. Like, he might have been upset about something, but that's the element of what's happening right now. I don't know the solution, to be honest with you. And I think you've seen a lot of iterations of this coming out of a lot of places, I'm trying to remember where actually in the Bay Area. I mean, you've got a lot of folks in Silicon Valley that are saying, hey, we want to make this news aggregator that's going to bring in all things. I would just argue that as a consumer of news, whether it's a policy or politics, whatever, crave it all. Because there's good points on both sides. I watch a lot of left-leaning stuff and read because I want to know what the other side's saying. Sometimes I actually learn something too. And sometimes it's compelling where I go, hey, that's an interesting thought. But I think that you need to look at things from as many angles as possible. And when you see conflict, right, and you say, hey, wait, this source said that, this policy is going to destroy 80 million jobs, and this policy says it'll create net 2, you should scratch your head and say, gosh, I should probably look into this more because those stories are in conflict. But be a vociferous consumer of news and information. Yes, ma'am.
As a young conservative here at Berkeley, how can I have more of a voice to just my opinions? Especially.
I think you guys do pretty well. Look, the answer is that there's much more of a voice today for people like you. Social media gives you that outlet. My only you all is the same way that I said tweet, someone makes a mistake, they screw up, or they say something, everyone's like, fire, a bunch of stuff, and find like-minded people. But you think about all of these people on, YouTube. What do I see the current director of Republican Party?
Winning.
Under Trump. But if you go back through history, the party that is in power in the presidency that president tends to put their stamp on the party, mostly for their term, right? So if you look at Clinton and Democrats into a centrist position and abandon a lot of liberal causes, don't think that happened. And so I think that there'll be some remnants of Trump when he leaves office. The question is how long? Is it 5, 10 years? But some things like trade, I think that, as much as as a former trade guy, I will tell you, I think that Trump was actually where the people and the party was, and it was just the leaders and the platform that hadn't caught up to him. So I think some issues he's actually was where the party is actually in terms of the grassroots. But we'll see some of the other issues. But I think it's going to continue to be, sort of a social conservative thing. Where I wonder is if we've lost our big hold on fiscal issues. I'm very concerned about the debt and spending. It's troubling that we as a party have not stayed more focused on that. And I hope we reaffirm our commitment to it. Yes, sir.
Well, I want to more about experience.
I'm sorry, I'll get to you. You're next. Yes, sir.
So I'm a former campaign organizer, fellow at the time, but I was up against an opponent who was way better funded than our campaign. So I was wondering if you had any advice for like when you're campaigning and your opponent like that has more money. Like, do you have any like tips? Anything general? Like, is it all grassroots that you're supposed to do, or?
No, I mean, so the one thing more than ever, data is available to help guide you, right? It literally grates on me when I see people standing over a bridge waving signs. I mean, it's like, oh, now I know who to vote for. I just saw a sign being waved. You should think about, so like, let's say, for example, you're, and I don't know what public records are available. If you're running for student council in Berkeley, to the extent that it's public, you go, okay, what students voted last time? Now your universe is, okay, those are what we would consider high propensity voters. They voted in the last student council. And then I have a connection to. I am into chess and these 5 things. And here are the people within the different clubs and organizations that I have a connection to, so I should start with them. But the data has given us a much better path to campaign on than ever before in terms of knowing where we should have people that align with us and people that should align with us. And so money's good, but it only goes so far, right? And it's always about what you spend your money on. If you look at a lot of the analysis after the election, one of the things I couldn't figure out with Trump is, they're like, what was he doing with all these Facebook ads? Well, they were basically creating many individual people and serving it up. Oh, you care about education, you care about healthcare, you care about the military veterans. And they were having a much more robust individual discussion. And it was that ability to get people, frankly, over the line. Yes, sir. Yes, you.
Yes, I'm curious what your take is on having a level of historical reference for the average individual. I'm a little bit older than most people here. You and I are probably contemporaries. I grew up.
31.
I hope that got on camera. I have conversations very often with people that are much younger than me, and I troll in to see what their frame of reference is and their perspective, because they're often very motivated to see change, but they don't have a frame of reference for it. And honestly, it's really alarming. There's a young lady in my life that I have a conversation with on occasion, and I bring up my frame of reference, and she has absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, but tells me I'm.
My advice is to show it to friends with. You have feedback. Show people that you're probably not friends with. Some folks on the left and say, "This is what I believe. I want that," and listen to their feedback. And if they say, "That's pretty incendiary," no.
Well, I did give it to them on the where it's like,
Well, my point would be, don't just speak to one person. Really, if it's that important to you, to see it and say, hey, from my perspective, that's it's good for. So, that's thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the Democrats going towards a socialist country as opposed to a capitalist.
I think that I find it there's a bit of irony that we applaud countries like Venezuela that are moving away from one form of government. Those of us who are old enough saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, saw the oppression of those people, and then some of our countries want to move in that direction. I think it brings up that gentleman's point where I think there's a lot of education about what form of government is best suited to serve people, and how we can do this. But again, I think going back to the AOC issue, I think the right needs to engage. If we believe that capitalism and free enterprise helps people and is good for this country, then we need to talk about it. But right now, the left is dominating the economic conversation. And so, the answer is we need to engage and talk about it in a respectful way. Say, hey, look, this is what makes our country great. This is what's founded on. This is how people are helped.
My concern is I don't think a lot of people that are younger than me, and I'm his contemporary, I don't think that they truly understand the word socialism. And I mean, I think they think everything's free.
It's incumbent upon all of us to go out and engage. Yes,
Che Guevara is our hero.
yes, ma'am. Yes.
So as far as working in politics, for a long time, how do you feel like it's changed being a political operative before and after this event?
We're not what?
Citizens United.
Citizens United is, it changed some of the campaign financing, but I've been involved in campaigns since the 90s. Unions used to dominate all the spending and mobilization, right? I mean, growing up, my first campaign, when you're going against some of the union support, it was amazing. Unions dominated the left landscape. Citizens United, to some degree, made a lot of things legal that were pretty much in terms of how corporations spent. There used to be what we called soft money. You could spend all the money, corporations and organizations, you could spend it, you couldn't expressly advocate for the election of a candidate for federal office. So you did all these stupid things. At the end of a commercial, instead of saying, so vote for Bob, you would say, so call Bob, tell him he's a great person. That was called issue ad. Right? There's an advocacy or issue ad as opposed to a campaign commercial. Citizens United basically just took the band-aids off and said, hey, you know what? This is silly. These guys are doing this. And do you know how Citizens United started? Right. It was a movie. And they got sued for not being able to want to put a movie on like pay-per-view. And they sued and said, this is ridiculous. We want to put this movie on pay-per-view. People can buy it. And they said, well, that's considered electioneering, and so we're not going to allow it. They said, okay, well, we'll go to court because we want to put a movie on. And that's how silly that